Hello and welcome to another The Hard Way Urbans video. This video is of us redoing our floors. We started with a small bedroom rather than doing the entire rest of the house because that seemed pretty daunting. I wish that we would have been able to get the original type wood that they had, but unfortunately we had to replace it with hemlock, which is a different color. I'm not terribly excited about it because I do think it would have turned out better had we had original flooring to replace it with. We just rented all the equipment from Home Depot, so we rented one of these big sanders and a small sander, which I didn't really like. Also, we didn't get heavy enough duty sandpaper, so we had to go back and get a heavier grit because we really needed to take a lot of the top off the flooring. The replacement hemlock that we got was already sealed, so we were trying to sand that off so we could stain it, but it just wouldn't come off. Neither one of us really liked the smaller sander, so when we redo the bigger portions of the house, we end up just buying a belt sander. This is after the wood's all been sanded, but before the varnish. We don't use any stain because it's kind of a golden color afterwards. You can really tell after it's all varnished and dried the difference between the hemlock and what I think is some kind of a soft wood, maybe like a pine or a fir. The brush broom that we used was so much better than we were able to get the second time, so I think that the coat came out a lot better and a lot smoother for this spare room. And this is after we put up the molding around the bottom. I think it looks really nice. Unfortunately, you can tell a big difference between the hemlock and the older wood, but I guess we'll cross that bridge if we ever decide to sell the house. This is a picture of the floors of the rest of the house before we even moved in. There was a lot of damage and staining, so we were a little bit apprehensive about how it would turn out after we started the sanding. We started in the smaller dining room area doing all of the edges and then moved into the living room area doing the edges as well with the new belt sander that we liked more. It was like the movie Groundhog Day with all of the sanding. But remember, you always have to have a little bit of fun and be a little bit silly when you're doing these projects. It keeps you sane. We did a lot of research before we started this portion, so because of all the chunks taken out and the damage to the floor, we read that we should do a diagonal pattern first, and this kind of evens out the floor, and then you go back in the direction of the wood. You'll see in later videos that it actually turns out to where you can't even see the diagonal pattern, I promise. Forward and backwards, backwards and forwards until the end of time. You can already see that the diagonal marks are starting to disappear. And you can see in these next couple of photos that the diagonal marks are gone and it looks really nice and smooth. If you've ever redone floors, you know that you just have to keep going back over it again and again with lighter and lighter grains of sandpaper. There was a big old ugly piece of wood dividing the living room and the old dining room, so we decided to take that out and clean up the edges of the wood, and we put in a couple pieces of the hemlock that we had left over, and I think it ended up looking really nice. It creates a nice division between the two rooms. It really looks much better than it used to. These next couple of shots are just of the floor after it's done and after we swept it all up and before we started varnishing. We could not find the broom brush that we used in the other room that swiveled, so this one did not swivel at all, and I don't feel like the finish was as good, and it kind of puddled in a lot of places, which we're really not happy about, but what can you do? This is after coat number 1. And this is us applying the second coat. We only did 2, so this is technically the finishing coat. It didn't turn out perfect because we're not professionals, but I think for a casual observer, it looks really nice. And you can only really see the imperfections and the bubbles of the varnish in places that you already know it's there. But I think, like I said, we're not professionals, so I feel like it turned out really well. Doing just the stairs was a little bit easier because you could get right down in there and see what you were doing. The only issue was that we didn't take off the banister, so we kind of had to go around that with the sander. This is after varnish, but before painting the front of the steps. I think it looks really nice, although you can see in the next couple of slides that I didn't paint the front of the top of the step. I left that white, and I really wished we would have stained that so it would have popped a little bit more. And of course, molding always makes it look just a little bit more finished and a little bit better. Speaking of molding, this is around the entirety of the living room and into the small dining room. I'm not sure if it's the varnish or if it's the sunlight, but it went from a little bit more golden brown to a little bit more orangey brown. And this is the final product. Once again, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.